Three. Hey, thanks for watching. I really appreciate you just tuning in and allowing me to encourage you and to help you thrive in the midst of the circumstances in which we find ourselves. And certainly the big news of the day, isn't it, is that we are going to be moving out of level 4, out of being locked down into something else. We don't have all the details or all the time frames, but isn't it true there's that sense of excitement and optimism and hopefulness as a consequence of just knowing that next week things are going to begin to change. Things are going to begin to transition and whatever that looks like, we're going to be moving forward because there's been that sense of like we've just been in our bubble and everything's been on hold. I know you've been working and remotely and all those things, but because of that lockdown and that sense of bubble, it feels like we've just been on hold. And so now there's that sense of excitement about moving forward. And before you rush into making plans for the future, I really want to ask and encourage you to just to think about dialing it down and taking a step back and thinking not so much about what you're going to do, but about how you're going to do it. Let me explain what I mean by that and why I think it's important for you. I really have this belief. I'm committed to this belief. I'm passionately wedded to this idea that God created you to make a difference. That your life is not you're not wallpaper to make something else stand out. You're not background music to make the soloist shine. I believe that your life is just as important and influential and has the same potential as anyone else's. The measure of your giftedness may be different to someone else's, but that doesn't take away from the fact that you're created to make a difference and you're created to be different. And that's what I want to encourage you to think about is in terms of how do you live out of that in a way that's going to bring people with you? How are you going to live out of that in a way that leads others into the things that God has for them? Because you are a leader. Leadership is not defined by position. I know so often we look at people in positions and we call them leaders, and by virtue of the position, they do lead. There's no question of that. But what makes a leader is not their position. It doesn't matter whether you're on the boardroom or the factory floor. It doesn't matter whether you are the prime minister or a caretaker. What matters and what determines your ability to lead is self-awareness and an understanding of what it means to lead. You see, regardless of the model that you operate with, I think as Christians, we need to recognize that God speaks a lot about leadership in the scriptures, and we see examples in different leaders at different times within the scriptures. But I think we need to move beyond that and look at what God says. And a good place to begin, I think if I was asked to, what scriptures would I look at to that I think are necessary to build myself on as a leader? There's a number of them, but I would certainly begin with Romans chapter 15, verses 1 to 3, where Paul talks about how we who are strong, we who are confident, we who understand who we are. It doesn't mean to say we're not wrestling with stuff, but we have an understanding of who we are. We who are strong ought to bear with the failings or the weaknesses of others and not to please ourselves. Each of us should please our neighbors for their good, and get this, to build them up. We should please our neighbors for their good, to build them up. And then Paul goes on and he says, for even Christ did not please himself. Even Jesus said that he didn't come to be served, but to serve. And I think the reason I think that's a great place to start with in terms of thinking about how we lead others is because if we're going to lead well, we need to lead ourselves well. And there's a lot that could be said about that, but I think it begins by recognizing this whole thing that to lead is to act on behalf of others. By definition, to be a leader is to act on behalf of others for their good. Not to think about what's in it for me, not to think around, well, how's this going to affect me, but to think around what's going to be good for them, what's going to help them, what's going to build them up, what's going to help them move out of where they are into what can be, what's going to help them begin to look beyond the problems and the crises to solutions, and what's necessary to help them then to begin to move into that. That's what good leadership, that's what strong leadership is about. And that's what you're capable of doing, because You don't need a position to do that. You're going to be surrounded by family, by friends, by colleagues, and all of them are going to be going through the same things that you're wrestling with now. And all of them are going to have the same questions. And if you would give time to step back and to think around, okay, so how might I address those? And how might I lead by example to make a way? Then they're going to look to you and they're going to follow your example. And as a consequence, even though history may never record your name, heaven's going to record your name as being one of those who helped shape the future that is before us. But for that to happen, as I said, you've got to lead yourself well. And I think the reason that we don't lead well, and there's a lot of reasons for it, but I think one of the most significant reasons that we attach leadership to office and then we don't lead well, and why we criticize people who don't do what we think they should, or fail to recognize when they are leading well because their politics, their philosophy, their brand doesn't resonate with us, is because we haven't dealt with stuff in ourselves. You see, I know people who currently think our Prime Minister has led terribly through this. And I think once you strip away the politics and the ideologies and everything else, I actually disagree. I think she's led remarkably well. See, to lead well, I think, is to help people make sense of whatever it is they're going through, and to then acknowledge it and then help people process it and point to the future and what could be, and to help people begin to move out of things. There are other things around it, but fundamentally that's a critical aspect of good leadership, and she's done that well. She really has. And I think if we strip out of politics and everything else, you'd have to admit she's done it better than some other political leaders on the global stage at the moment. But the reason I think people struggle to see that or to recognize that in her, just as, to be fair, that way back in 10 years ago in the earthquakes, where we had a political leader on the opposite side of the political spectrum with a totally different leadership style. And again, I think led us admirably well through that crisis, helped people process it, acknowledge the hurts, the frustrations, the anxieties about what the future would hold, and help people process that, and acted in ways and responded to people in ways that helped them move beyond that, and help them begin to pick their lives up again. And yet again, there are people who didn't recognize that for what it was because they didn't share that leader's political perspective. And yet I want to say both of them led phenomenally well. And I say that because I think that the reason people don't recognize it, and perhaps why you and I struggle to lead well, is because we haven't dealt with those things in our own lives that would allow us to do what Paul says, to put others before ourselves, and to really key into what people are saying, and not just hear the words, but hear their heart, to hear their anxieties, to hear their stresses, to hear the things that are just below the surface, so to speak. And then, because we haven't dealt with our own buttons, our own unresolved issues, we don't not only hear those things, we don't know how to speak into those things in ways that will help them move beyond what is and into what can be. And I just want to encourage you to take this time before we rush into the future, to just sit back and just say, Lord, why are these buttons pushed in my life when I hear this report and when I see this person on TV and when I hear that, just why do they push my buttons? Because that's the beginning point of recognizing the areas that you need to work through in order to be able to move beyond yourself to engaging with others. You see, I don't doubt that our Prime Minister, away from the cameras and the privacy of her bubble, looks at baby Neve, and I don't doubt that she has the same issues that you and I have. I'm convinced that she looks at her baby and just wonders what will the future be like for them, and she's processing all of the stuff that you and I have to process, but she doesn't let it get in the way of acting on our behalf, of trying to key into what is going to help build us up, what is going to help take us from where we are into where we need to be. And you can do that as well. It's not about politics. It's not about ideologies. It's about identifying what's going on in my life, recognizing it for what it is, being able to step back from it so that you can lead well by making it not about you, but about the other person. How can I help them? How can I build them up? How can I bring them with me into the future that God has? And trust me, if you can do that, then you have earned the right there when your time comes to stand in glory, to hear our Father say, well done, good and faithful servant, because that's all that's being asked of you right now, to lead well, to act on others' behalf in ways that build them up, the ways that help allow them to move beyond what is to what will be. So that's my thought for tonight. God bless you, and look forward to hearing from you.